And this whole issue about liberalism is basically the hot topic of the day. Like everyone talks about liberalism. Liberals are being demonized every Friday during the Friday sermon. Like liberals have become the probably number one enemy, to be followed by Christians and gays. So we are having this kind of problem in this country, and even the most corrupt person in this country talks about liberalism and denounce liberalism and human rightism, whatever that means. But that's what the term that he used. So basically, it's a topic that we really have to understand, because liberals have been portrayed by many right-wing Islamists, Ismail, for example, to be basically people or Muslims who are without Islamic values. Muslims who drink, who fornicate, who do whatever they like, without any consideration of their religious belief. So that's the connotation of liberals that have been portrayed by these right-wing extremists. And I think that we understand liberalism differently from what they're trying to say. We had debates. I had my own debate with PAS and Isma. One when this Pemuda PAS Lembah Pantai, who's basically, I think the chairperson is here among the crowd. Former, yeah. Who invited me to be a panelist, and we talk about human rights in Islam. And their idea about human rights were very skewed. Human rights to them were basically, you can have sex with whoever you like, and you can have sex even with animals. That's the word that he used. With animals. What kind of perverted idea is that? And it came from an ustaz. So I just couldn't understand. So this is the problem that we're facing nowadays. That liberals were being demonized day in and day out, and ritually every Friday sermon, almost every Friday sermon. So the thing is that this is a very important topic, and it's very unfortunate that my colleague, my former schoolmate from Penang Free School, Dr. Mujahid Yusof Rawa, is not around today. But I believe Ustaz Mazli Malik and Wan Saiful Wanjan could elaborate further on this topic. And without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Savakil to present his talk on this topic.
Tuan dan puan, selamat pagi, or good morning, and thanks for coming here this morning and sharing this morning with us. And many thanks to the Islamic Renaissance Front, Brother Ahmed Musa especially, and all his colleagues and friends, who has invited me for the second time in Malaysia in 2 years. I want to come every year. We'll talk about that, but it's really a great pleasure to be here again. And I'm also I'm glad to visit Malaysia. I love everything about this country. I mean, I've seen it for 10 days in total, but it was always very great. And I'm also happy and proud to see that there are Muslims here who are thinking about the problems of our Muslim world and see the solution in more freedom, not less freedom, not more authoritarianism, but more freedom and more openness and a more broader vision. And that's really important. We need that in every corner of the Muslim world. And thanks for keeping up that war of ideas, if you will, here. And liberal ideas might be small in many Muslim countries, but they are the future, I think. They are, if we will have a good future as the Ummah, as the Muslims. I came from Turkey just a few days ago, and I've learned that in Malaysia, liberal is not a very nice term sometimes. For some people, as I also just heard from Brother Musa. And there's a lot of confusion there. So what liberal means. So therefore, let me offer, as someone who defines myself as a Muslim liberal, let me define what liberal means. A liberal again, many different meanings can be given to the term, but in my understanding, a liberal is not somebody who doesn't have values, is not somebody who doesn't necessarily believe in a religion, who doesn't practice a religion. A liberal can be a very pious, practicing Muslim, or a Christian, or a Jew, or he can be an atheist as well, because this is a matter of politics. A liberal is somebody who just doesn't want to impose his or her values on others. He can be a very pious Muslim, but he will respect that other people can have different ways of life, and he will respect and he will understand that. Therefore, this image of liberals as these whiskey-drinking, sex-party-making kind of deviants, that is a cartoon that we should not really give ourselves into and believe in. The question then comes, why do we need this? Why do we need to be liberals? Is this a good idea in the first place? Well, I think we need liberals in our societies, and we need more liberalism. First of all, to be able to live in peace and dignity without being oppressors or being oppressed. Sometimes people ask me, don't Muslims like actually liberalism? Actually, Muslims love liberalism sometimes when they are an oppressed minority. Like, go to France, and there's a ban on the hijab in France, very authoritarian, very illiberal. You will see Muslims defending freedom, liberté, and saying that this is individual freedom, we should be able to wear the hijab. I made that argument against the French-minded secularists in Turkey who banned the hijab for many years in campuses. It was a shame for Turkey, which was lifted a few years ago only. And I also noticed, for example, in Turkey that the very pious Muslims of Turkey liked liberalism in the early 2000s when liberals were saying it's a matter of individual belief and that the individual has the right to wear whatever she wants. And so that can be hijab. That's a good idea. So they like liberalism, the conservative, for example, Islamists of Turkey, if you will. Now they're in power, maybe they don't like it that much. Things might have changed a little bit. But you understand the value of such concepts like human rightism. When you are an oppressed, if you're Rohingya in Burma, in Arakan, you will understand that human rightism is not a bad thing because it's the human rights organizations that will defend you against a brutal junta that imposes Buddhism on Muslims in this time. But I think we Muslims should be principled on this. Instead of liking and admiring liberalism when we are an oppressed minority and forgetting it and trashing it out and demonizing it when we have power, we should have a more principled on this. And that's why this is a very great topic, can Islamists be liberals? Actually, I want to discuss, can Muslims be liberals? Most Islamists, because Islamism is a category within, I think, the Muslim world. Generally, Islamism, in my understanding, stands for a political project based on Islam and generally a demand for an Islamic state, which is by nature not very compatible with the idea of liberalism. Therefore, sometimes you have liberal-leaning Islamists. In Tunisia, the Rashid Ghannouchi and his Nahda party is defined as an Islamist party, but it has some liberal ideas, and I admire that. But generally, I will discuss, can Muslims be liberals? Can believing, pious Muslims be liberals? And my answer is yes, we can be. And for me, it is rooted none other than the Quran itself. In Surah Al-Baqarah 200, verse 256, a verse probably you all know, La ikraha fid din, or let there be no compulsion in religion. Let there be no compulsion, no coercion in religion. Another verse says, the truth is from your Lord. Let anyone who want to believe it, believe it. Let anyone who want to disbelieve it, disbelieve it. Another verse says to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you are not a guardian over them, you are only a warner. You can only warn people, you can only advise people, but you're not their guardian to control them. Now there are many verses like that actually in the Quran, and generally liberal-leaning Muslims refer to them. But the not so liberal-leaning Muslims interpret those verses in interesting ways. Actually, I noticed that in one of my trips to Malaysia, the previous trip, and I realized that there was a translation of the Quran in English popular here, actually printed and distributed by Saudi Arabia, printed in and distributed by Saudi Arabia. In that small part of the verse I told you, let there be no compulsion in religion is given by a parenthesis inside. There are two little brackets. And it reads, let there be no compulsion, put parentheses, in the acceptance of, close the parentheses, religion. So what is the difference between saying, let there be no compulsion in religion, and let there be no compulsion in the acceptance of religion? Well, when you say, let there be no compulsion in the acceptance of religion, it just means that you're not forced to enter Islam. If you're born non-Muslim, okay, Muslims will not make you Muslims forcibly. That's not an Islamic practice. You can live as non-Muslim. But once you are in Islam, there may be a state police controlling you, whether you fast or you do your namaz and your prayers, and whether you drink and so on and so forth. So you will be controlled by the society or state. And if you want to get out by some, chance, which is not something we would like to see as Muslims, but if someone wants to change his religion, that's not allowed either. Once you're in, you have to do everything by law, and then you are not allowed to change your religion. Why do we have such parentheses in Quranic interpretations, in the translations of the Quran sometimes? Because the Quran is not the only source of the Islamic law, Sharia or fiqh we have at hand. Then comes the Sunnah, the Prophet's example. Then comes the medieval scholars and their interpretations of these sources. And then comes Ijma, Qiyas, and their techniques of how to develop the fiqh. So we have a whole body of literature. And in that whole body of literature, yes, there are illiberal injunctions. Yes, there are things that would not fit human rightism in that sense. But in my view, in my humble view, and I'm not an Islamic scholar in the sense of having any authority, but I've referred to Islamic scholars. When you look at all those conflicts between liberal values and Islamic law, you see that these are matters of interpretation and matters of context. The Quran never punishes what I call sin, it always punishes crime. I have a whole chapter on that in my book. All the hudud laws in the Quran are about crimes which hurt other people. You steal, you kill, that's a crime. When you do adultery, you're betraying your wife and the child becomes unknown, so that's in that sense a crime. But also things like personal sins, the Quran doesn't bring any punishment. The scholars brought those punishments by analogy, by qiyas, saying that, we should also punish this, we should also punish that. So this expansion of fiqh in medieval era happened by qiyas, which is a matter of ijtihad, which is a matter of interpretation, which can be reinterpreted today. So in that sense, if you ask me, can Muslims be liberals? I will tell you, if Muslims are true to the Quran, but also have some reinterpretation on traditional interpretations of the Quran and the Hadith and the classical schools of jurisprudence, yes, they can be liberals, and there is no conflict. And the details are long. I'll speak in the afternoon too, so I don't want to bore you with all those technical details of the fiqh. But you can at this point ask me, why do we need such an effort? We have fiqh and sharia, it's already there. Why do we need this liberalism thing? It brings a lot of nonsense to our societies anyway. It corrupts minds. If you're liberal, if you're free, people will read Charles Darwin and they will get confused. Yeah. It's better to ban that book. So, in that sense, the discussion is not actually in the necessarily level of how can we have ijtihad, but should we do ijtihad? Do we need to reinterpret these issues in Islam? And generally, the Muslims who are very close to liberal ideas, who prefer authoritarian interpretations of Islam, they will say, no, we don't need these things because we have to keep our societies ordered, we have to tell people what's the truth, and we have to check whether they are good Muslims or not, and that's how we preserve our society. Now, throughout my experience in the Muslim world, I have seen that this authoritarian approach has two disastrous consequences. One, it breeds hypocrisy rather than genuine religiosity. Second, it kills our intellectual capacity. Now, what do I mean by here? Let me open these two things a little bit. Probably some of you have been to Saudi Arabia. I've been there for Umrah and for events, conferences as well in Riyadh. every time I get on to a flight from Saudi Arabia to Turkey, I noticed something interesting. Every lady got on the flight with niqab or hijab, abaya, very full cover. And I said, wow, all of them are very conservative. Interesting and good. I mean, that's fine. When the flight landed in Turkey, in Istanbul, some of those ladies went to the toilet and came out with quite mini skirts, pardon my language. And I said, interesting. Like, they are practicing because they are in Saudi territory. It's the law. They're not practicing when they're outside of it. And actually in Turkey, it's famous that some people from Iran and Saudi Arabia come to Turkish bars and have the craziest parties and so on and so forth, because they can have that at home. And which is just one example of a very, I think, deep phenomenon. When you impose religion by state, by law, by police, you're not making people religious. You are making people hypocritical. If they don't have a right to choose whether they will wear hijab or not, if they don't have a right to choose whether they will fast in Ramadan or not, if they don't have a right to choose whether they will go to the mosque or not go to the mosque, then they can't do it with their own conscience. They can't do it for God. They can't do it with ikhlas, which is sincerity in religion, doing everything solely for the sake of God. And I think this has always been a problem in every, I think, religious community. But in the modern world, this gap is opening because people are seeing the outside world and people are traveling and people are different societies. So if you don't give them a conscience, if you don't give them a wisdom, if you don't give them religiosity genuinely, if you just impose by the law, they will look as if they're Muslim, but maybe practicing, but they will do other things. And in fact, I have a friend who lived in Iran for many years, and once one of his observations is that he said in Iran, actually less people fast in Ramadan than in Turkey. With all due respect to a lot of Iranians maybe who would disagree, but that was one observation. I said, why? Because in Iran, he says, the government controls it and people hate it. People go at home and drink and eat and they're angry at the government. And in Turkey, the government doesn't bother with you, so you do it because you're a good Muslim. You're pious. And a lot of people do it out of their own conviction. So is the Islam imposing state of Iran helping Islam? Or is the more secular state of Turkey helping Islam in this case, helping genuine religiosity? So I think that is a very fundamental issue. Another important point here is that whomever imposes Islam, by the way, coming and saying that, okay, this is Islam and we're imposing and you should do these things. He's imposing his interpretation of Islam. What if he's Shafi, I'm Hanafi? I wouldn't agree with something. What if he's Salafi, I'm Shia, which deserves to be killed by some, but according to some people. What is it's the other way around? What if the Shia fiqh and you're Sunni, and you wouldn't agree with everything that they're doing? For ISIS, all of our heretics. I mean, like all of us are like infidels that deserve to be apostates, killed. So, whomever comes and says we are establishing Islam by law, they are actually interpreting their interpretation of Islam. Of course, they will say this is true Islam. Everybody says this is true Islam. I mean, they are in that tradition because they think it's true Islam. There I take the view devised by Islamic theologians of the Murjia, early in Islamic school of theology. A very important school of thought we forgot. I wrote an article about it in the New York Times a couple of months ago. Because ISIS had a long article defining Murjia as the greatest heresy. The Murjia, it comes from the Arabic word irja, which means to postpone. The Murjia were the early school of thought in Islam, which looked at all these wars between the supporters of Ali radiallahu anh, and Muawiyah and Hawarij, all different sects. They said, we can't know which party is right. Only Allah knows that. So let's postpone this issue to afterlife. Let people do what they want, what they believe in. So they created a basis for pluralism in Islam. And I think we need a basis for pluralism. Some Muslims will be Salafis, some Muslims will be Shafis, some Muslims will be Reformists, some Muslims will be Shia. we should be able to live together by basically not imposing one version of ourselves to another. We can advise other Muslims, we can have civil society work, we can try to have da'wah to non-Muslims or even maybe fellow Muslims, but we should not impose it. And when we impose it, we're not achieving anything. One more thing, I said it creates two big problems, authoritarianism. One is the problem with hypocrisy, let alone with to mention human rights violations. The other problem is intellectual poverty that it brings to us. What do I mean by there? One thing, we Muslims are generally very proud of our initial centuries, the first 5 centuries of Islam. We are generally proud of great Muslim scientists and thinkers. We say, oh, we Muslims discovered mathematics before you Westerners. It was Al-Khwarizmi who developed algorithma, and the West got from that. Ibn Sina was the pioneer in medicine. Farabi had great political ideas which came before that. Ibn Khaldun actually was the forerunner of free market economy. Van Saiful can maybe enlighten us more on that. So there's this great age of Islam when we had the best thinkers and scientists in the world. A American and kind of somewhat of a neocon, like almost Orientalist scholar once said, if there were Nobel Prizes 1,000 years ago, all of them would go to Muslims. Baghdad and Cordoba and Damascus, these were the most enlightened cities of the world. The libraries in Baghdad was huge when France and London were just very, very underdeveloped, very poor cities. How we were great? Well, we were open-minded. Those Muslim scientists and thinkers who had these inventions, they were reading the Quran, they were most of them very pious Muslims. They were reading Aristotle, Greek philosophy. They were studying traditions from China, India, Jewish and Christian traditions. There was a house of wisdom in Baghdad which translated Aristotle into Arabic, translated other works by other traditions into Arabic, and created this library. They didn't ban books. They found books and translated them and read them. And that intellectual dynamism created a great legacy and a lot of results. What happened after that is that, well, gradually we stagnated. Gradually our scholars start to say, we solved all the problems. We thought every problem possible in the world, we gave answers. So you just have to repeat these things. We stagnated. There has been no major intellectual scientific change in the Muslim world from the 13th to the 19th century, during which modernity, exploded in Europe, and all the modern technology and sciences. And when we discovered, wow, these Europeans know something different, it was a shock, and how to deal with this. And that shock is actually still going on. So if we need to open up, if we need to have Muslim thinkers, scientists, universities, that will really put an influence in the world, that will attract people, that will change minds, that will empower our societies, we should be able to read without banning books. We should also be able to articulate our faith in more sophisticated ways. One example here, besides my writing on Islam, politics, and liberalism, I've also researched the issue of Islam and science and faith, atheism, these kind of debates, and I have writings on that too. 10 years ago, I was more even interested in those issues. Because in Turkey, the books of Richard Dawkins have been translated into Turkish. You know Richard Dawkins? He's a famous Islamic Salafi scholar. No, okay.
Atheist Salafi.
Yeah, he's actually an atheist Salafi, actually. Yes, great. Very good. Atheist evangelist, they call him, but he's an atheist Salafi in Oxford University, but he's a very, I would say, dogmatic and aggressive atheist. But he has books, and his books were translated into Turkish. So in Turkey, there's an atheist movement, and as a Muslim, I want to do something about that, write about this. I realized that all the good, sophisticated answers to Richard Dawkins came from Western Christians. And I said, what are Muslim countries are doing about this? Well, they're just banning Richard Dawkins' books, and the problem is over. But when you ban this, you don't face this. You can't argue against it. You say, okay, let's close his website, ban his book. But your son will ultimately leave your country, go to a Western university, and have that book, and then he will be, oh my God, what is this? He has no idea how to counter that. You can't just say it's haram, forget it. I mean, by creating these intellectual bubbles, we are not helping ourselves. We should rather read, learn, counter with that, battle with that intellectually, and we should have, in that sense, we will have more mature societies, we will have more mature intellectual environments. And that's why I think we need freedom, we need a liberal, basically political setting to be able to be Muslims in the way we understand and feel, not as somebody defines for us. And we need it also to flourish. If there's one secret of Western modernity, that is that kind of individual freedom, which allowed a lot of progress. And I think we need the same. And we have the values in our faith, actually, which gave us the same thing 1,000 years ago. We should just go and, check our sources once again and see our own tradition. Again, many thanks for your attention, and thanks for being with us today, and many thanks for Islamic Renaissance Front for the amazing work they're doing in Malaysia. Thank you.